You don't know terror until you hear the metal grating of centuries-old lead on lead, and then feel the cavern breathe. Imagine that first razor-cold shaft of candlelight cutting through a crack, revealing a coffin so pitted and warped it seems alive. Welcome to Westminster Abbey's hidden vault, where what lay inside Elizabeth I's lead coffin will haunt you long after. The screen goes dark. You step through the heavy oak door and the world shifts. The air underground is thicker than water, tasting of mold, dust, and a faint tang of something metallic. And you realize it's not your imagination. It's blood, long since bone dry, clinging to stone like a stain. Your boots echo on slick flagstones wet with condensation that beads on the walls as though the tomb itself is weeping. You hold your breath, heart hammering, as your guide lifts the lamp higher to reveal the arching ceiling, each block carved with centuries of forgotten prayers. The light trembles and suddenly you see it, a row of lead coffins, each one more corroded than the last, but only one holds the kingdom's darkest secret, the coffin of Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen to her people. But here, in this subterranean hush, she is nothing but a vessel. Its lid is pocked and bubbled, bronze clasps long since eaten away by time. Archaeologists crouch at its side, drills in hand, scraping clumps of rust-colored oxide. Each twist of the bit sends shards of ancient metal clattering into the gloom, like the bells of some demonic cathedral. You can almost hear the ghost of a prayer in each ring. A hush falls, so complete you can hear your own pulse. Then, as if in slow motion, they pry open the rim. A whisper of air, acrid and cold, hisses out, carrying with it the weight of 4 centuries. Inside, the velvet lining has turned a blackish brown, stiff and brittle. Patches of cloth cling to the wood in indistinct patterns, as though some monstrous creature has crawled through, dragging its claws. You lean forward and catch the first stench, a thick, sweet rot undercut by bitterness, an alchemy of decay and embalming spices so overpowering you stagger back, coughing. The archaeologists exchange glances. No perfumed anointing oils here, no lavish ceremony's residual scent. Only the raw, brutal truth of death. Pockets of air rise from the abyss, swirling dust motes like spectral dancers in the lamp glow. They lift the inner tray, its edges scored by iron tongs that once held flesh. And now, without warning, you see bone. Hands, dainty and regal, still clasped across a cracked wooden chest. Fingers curled inward, ivory white but stained in places a sickly brown. The skull rests slightly tilted as if to stare back at you, empty sockets holding the candle's reflection like twin abysses. A whisper of lace, what remains of her ruff, clings to the nape, stiff with resin. You swallow hard. This was a woman who commanded nations, whose portrait hung in every royal court, and here she lies like a hollowed-out shell. You edge closer, forced by morbid fascination. The lead coffin's interior walls bear scratches, tiny, jagged gouges scoring the metal from within. Some say it was her soul, desperate to escape. Others chalk it up to the shifting decay. Either way, it chills you to the marrow. Your guide jabs a long probe into the tray, stirring the dust and brittle fragments of cloth into the air. You flinch as a small cloud rises, each particle a memory of ceremonies lost to time, of prayers whispered under vaulted ceilings. The video cuts to high-definition close-ups, residue of myrrh and black peppercorns crushed to powder, stuck in creases of broken bone, shards of a crimson dye once used to tint her cheeks, and worst of all, a tangle of sinew and hardened gore where the chest had been cut open during embalming. The camera pans along the empty ribcage, now a latticework of bronze-tinted bone, each rib fractured where hooks had torn them back. You feel the room's temperature drop as though the coffin's chill has seeped into the very air. A voiceover, low and measured, drops the first historical bombshell. In 1613, Elizabeth's loyal physician John Simons recorded a perfunctory ceremony of incense and holy water, but the true rite was conducted in secret, an autopsy so brutal her courtiers suppressed every record. You see an old manuscript page fade in, Latin scrawled across yellowed parchment, "Coffin inferiora secta," the lower part of the coffin cut, and you realize the lie that powered an empire. The footage rewinds, showing a watercolor sketch from the 19th century opening of her vault. Gentlemen in cravats and goggles stand aghast as the coffin lid is lifted. One drops his tools, another clasps a handkerchief to his face. Their horror becomes yours, visceral and immediate. The voice returns. They found no jewel-encrusted shroud, no queenly diadem, only a royally embalmed corpse, mutilated to a grotesque anatomical exhibit, and beneath those ruins, evidence of something darker. The screen goes black for a beat. Then you hear it, a soft, wet sound, like leather tearing. The title slams in. What they found inside Queen Elizabeth's coffin was far more horrifying than you imagine. And now you're hooked, because you've seen what most only read about in dusty archives, and you're desperate to know more. Beyond the sensational, the story that unfolds reveals she'd insisted on being dissected while still warm. Her own fear of mass grave desecration drove her to command that her entrails be removed, not for science, but for sanctification. The surgeon's report, preserved in a library vault, speaks of red wine flushing through her veins, an attempt to stave off rot, followed by layers of myrrh, cinnamon, and frankincense packed into her hollowed torso. You watch reconstructed diagrams of her internal organs, ghostly overlays on her skeletal remains, as if trying to chart the last battleground of her body. It gets worse. Microscopic analysis reveals fungal spores and bacteria modern medicine would recognize as lethal, yet they lay dormant for centuries. One researcher even claims to have isolated ancient strains of Clostridium perfringens, the agent of gas gangrene. In that sealed coffin, under layers of lead and velvet, a toxic stew brewed, silent, invincible. The camera zooms in on a rusted metal latch, and you hear a narrator murmur, "Next, how this hidden bioweapon nearly rewrote history." You sit forward, every sense heightened. The faint hum of your speakers becomes a pulse in your veins. Your palms sweat on the keyboard, because now you know the true horror of a queen's death, not the loss of an empire, but the secret that imperial power can extend even into the grave, where death itself becomes a weapon. And this is only the beginning. When we return, you'll see the untold aftermath, letters censored, courts silenced, and a nation that built its future on a coffin of lies and microbial nightmares. Stay with us, and remember, when history whispers in the dark, it often carries its own poison. You steady your breathing as the camera pulls back from that rusted latch, the tarnished metal a silent witness to centuries of secrets. In this second descent into Elizabeth's post-mortem mystery, we leave the silent tomb behind and step into a world of hushed corridors and locked archives, where every parchment and skull fragment carries a fragment of truth darker than you ever guessed. First, imagine yourself in the dimly lit vault of the Bodleian Library at Oxford. The air is stale with age. Rows of leather-bound folios stretch into shadow. Here, among musty tomes on natural philosophy and royal necrology, rests the surgeon's original report, handwritten by John Simons, the Queen's personal physician. The archivist lifts the vellum gently, dust motes swirling in the beam of your flashlight. You can almost taste the chalky tang of centuries-old parchment. As the light glides over Simon's copperplate script, certain phrases leap out: spiritus vitalis withdrawn, cavitas thoracis aperta, oleum unguentum suffusum. In plain English, her life's breath was methodically drained, her chest cavity flayed, open, and embalming oils suffused through her tissues to mask the stench of decay. You lean in closer, finger tracing a blot of faded purple ink, no doubt from the quill nib catching on damp parchment. Suddenly, the archivist's finger taps the margin, where a later hand has scrawled, "Suppressed." Your heart hammers. Who dared mark out the ghastly details? And why? The answer lies in a sealed dispatch from the Privy Council, buried in the state papers at Kew. You cut to a reenactment. Candles gutter on a long table as stern-faced counselors debate the fate of Elizabeth's dead body. Lord Burghley argues that the truth would shatter her mythos. Sir Walter Raleigh warns that leaking the surgeon's gruesome notes could incite public panic. No small thing in plague-ridden London. Ultimately, they vote to redact the official records, consigning the corpse's anatomy to whispered gossip. The reenactment ends on a fist slamming the ledger shut, echoing like a death knell. Next, fast forward to the 19th century, when the vault was rediscovered by Dean Arthur Stanley. The film cuts to sepia-toned sketches of Stanley and his team, scandalized expressions frozen on papier-mâché, but nothing in their published report hints at the full horror. The reports of fungal growth, the dark stains along the coffin walls, the cloud of spore-laden dust that rose like a miasma when the lid was cracked. Those details remained buried, both literally and bureaucratically. Modern science would change that. You're transported to a sterile laboratory at the University of Cambridge. Researchers in white coats unseal a protective vial containing black dust scraped from Elizabeth's coffin rim. As they load it into Petri dishes, you hear the low hum of incubators. Time-lapse footage shows tiny black colonies sprouting, their filaments branching like demonic trees. Under the microscope, you witness the spore's terrifying morphology, branches tipped with infective knobs begging for living tissue to invade. A mycologist explains in a calm, measured voice, "These are Aspergillus niger strains, but they've mutated over time, acquiring resistance to all known antifungals." You flinch at the implication. Once airborne in a closed crypt, these spores could have been lethal to anyone without protection. And for centuries, the lead coffin, meant to seal and decay, did exactly the opposite, trapping a bioweapon in wait. But the true shocker arrives when geneticists sequence fragments of bacterial DNA preserved in Elizabeth's embalming spices. Layers of cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense were chosen not only for scent, but for their antibacterial properties. Yet within those fragrant powders hide remnants of Clostridium perfringens, gas gangrene bacteria, likely introduced by contaminated tools during embalming. The resulting concoction created a perfect incubator, organic nutrients in the spices feeding the bacteria under anaerobic conditions inside the airtight coffin. The on-screen graphic animates the process, stale air, rich in myrrh oils, compressing against Elizabeth's organs, bacteria feasting on lipids, releasing toxins, spores lodging in her hollowed skull. The narration drops another bombshell. Some historians now believe that the Queen may have inadvertently created a deadly bioweapon, one that could have decimated anyone who dared open her tomb without proper precautions. You shiver. History, long told as a tale of majesty and grace, now reveals a macabre twist, a monarch's death chamber transformed into an incubator for microscopic horror. Still reeling, you're led to the shadowed aisles of the Hunterian Museum in London. Here, preserved artifacts from royal autopsies line glass cabinets, rusted amputation saws, steel hooks still caked in dark crusts, tattered leather pouches inscribed with herbe divine, her sacred herbs. A curator lifts a small blackened sachet, cracked and brittle. You lean forward to see its contents, crumbly fragments of cinnamon bark and myrrh beads stained with dried blood. She warns you, do not handle these without gloves. Even now, there's enough residual bacterium to warrant caution. The film cuts to you donning full protective gear, mask, gloves, goggles, as you gingerly open one sachet. A cloud of dust blooms, and you cough reflexively. The camera closes in on your eyes, wide behind the goggles, and you hear your own ragged breath in the microphone. This visceral moment drives home the point. Elizabeth's death and her post-mortem treatment continue to pose a danger centuries later. But it wasn't just microbes that hid in her tomb. The video shifts tone as you stand before a row of portraits in the National Portrait Gallery. One by Nicholas Hilliard shows Elizabeth in regal opulence, pearls braided through her hair, ermine-trimmed gown, delicate ruff framing her face. Beside it, a lesser-known sketch depicts her as an older woman, a sallow complexion, gaunt cheeks. The curator explains the latter was drawn after her death, likely based on the wax mask made by the court's embalmers. In that sketch, the mask's fissures are stark, plaster peeking through beeswax, a frozen grin too wide for comfort. You trace your finger along the glass. This was the face they presented to mourners, the artifice of eternal youth covering the brutal truth of decay. Beneath that mask lay the hollowed shell revealed in that lead coffin, a juxtaposition of living myth and rotting body. Next, we follow you to a clandestine meeting of history's shadow operatives, underground manuscript dealers trading forbidden transcripts of Simon's original notes. In a cramped back room, by flickering gaslight, you witness the handover of a leather-bound journal stamped Elizabeth I, embalming. The dealer speaks in hushed tones. This document was nearly destroyed in 44. Hidden from the king's archivist, they believed its contents could undermine the monarchy's sanctity. As you open the journal, pages crack, releasing the scent of old leather and iron oxide. You leaf through drawings of surgical incisions, each meticulously labeled in Simon's neat hand. One sketch depicts the removal of the queen's brain through the nasal cavity, a procedure so gruesome it defies belief. The screen fades to black and a lone phrase appears in white letters. What if this wasn't done for piety but for power? The question hangs like a guillotine blade. Your next stop is the vault of the Royal College of Physicians. Behind a locked door and security clearance, you gain access to a sealed box containing fragments of Elizabeth's funerary garments. A conservator shines a UV light on the silk, revealing hidden stains of embalming fluids, crystallized salts, and embedded pathogens. Under magnification, the fabric looks less like royal finery and more like a laboratory petri dish. The UV light picks out fluorescence where certain spores have colonized, mapping a roadmap of microbial activity across the weave. This, the conservator whispers, is the closest we come to a living fingerprint of the queen's death. You lean in, mesmerized by the ghostly glow, aware that each luminescent spot marks a triumph of wrought over majesty. As the narrative deepens, you begin to see a pattern. Where royal pomp meets scientific curiosity, history's veneer peels away to reveal an undercurrent of brutality and obsession. Elizabeth's embalming was not simply a matter of hygienic necessity, it was a demonstration of power, an assertion that even in death, the queen's body served the throne. The lead coffin, sealed to show respect, instead locked in a secret of cruelty, microbial revolt, and historical lies. Toward the end of part 2, the camera returns you to Westminster Abbey at dusk. You stand outside the chapel's heavy doors, the golden light of sunset glinting on stained glass windows. A guide lies kneeling before the entrance, tracing its gargoyle-adorned threshold. He looks up, face grave, and whispers, "No one enters this vault without an order from the monarch, and even then, they do so at their own risk." In a final twist, you reveal that a recent petition by a group of genealogists and forensic scientists seeks permission to reopen the vault under full biohazard protocols. Their goal, to document and preserve the coffin's interior before the next century's corrosion, claims another layer of history. But the Church of England has stalled, fearful that reopening the Queen's tomb will unleash not only spores and bacteria, but a public reckoning with the darker side of royal legacy. You close on that unanswered question: will Elizabeth's coffin ever be opened again? Or will history's most notorious crypt remain sealed, its horrors locked away beneath lead, velvet, and the weight of power? Stay tuned for part 3, the narrator intones, where we'll venture beneath the political intrigue to uncover the personal letters smuggled into that vault. Letters that reveal Elizabeth's hidden fears, her private prayers, and the lengths she went to protect her legacy, even from death itself. And with that, the screen fades to black, leaving you perched on the edge of revelation, hungry for more dark truths from the royal crypt. You step back into the hush of the abbey's vault. This time, your lamp throws long shadows across the dusty stone floor, and the air feels charged as though it remembers every prayer ever whispered here. Part 3 takes you beyond bones and dust into the intimate world Elizabeth once thought to secure from mortal decay. Her private letters, smuggled deep into her tomb, sealed in wax to survive plague, court intrigue, and time itself. What you uncover will reveal the Virgin Queen not as an untouchable icon, but as a woman haunted by doubt, fear, and a desperate need to outwit death. You approach a small alcove off to the side of the main crypt, where an unassuming niche carved into the wall holds a weathered oaken box. Its surface is blackened by centuries of candle soot, and a fragment of crimson ribbon, once a royal seal, peeks from beneath a layer of dust. You run your fingertip over the carved initials, ER, feeling the coarse grain and imagining the Queen's own hand pressing the box shut. With gloved hands, you lift the lid and a faint whiff of lavender and lemon balm drifts upward, an herbal scent chosen not for fragrance alone but for its antiseptic properties, known to ward off decay and pry open ancient seams. Inside lie 3 bundles of parchment, each tied with silken cord. The first you hold aloft, a letter addressed in Elizabeth's flowing copperplate. "To my dearest sister in sovereignty," it begins, though the recipient remains unnamed. You unfold the vellum, careful not to let the brittle edges crack. The ink, faded to a soft brown, still holds a palpable urgency. "If these words survive me, know that my heart is not the fortress it appeared. Each dawn finds me restless, burdened by secrets no counsel can bear. I write to you from the threshold of mortality, knowing that when I bow to the surgeon's scalpel, a part of me shall linger in this ink. Guard my legacy, I beseech you, for without truth, I shall haunt these halls forever. Your breath catches. Here is the queen, stripped of ceremony, her voice quivering on the page. You lean closer and trace the swirl of her signature, Elizabeth R. Beneath it, a dried smear of camphor oil, applied to preserve the parchment, a single tear from her own cheek, trapped in the fibers. You move to the second bundle. This time the seal is broken, but the parchment within remains folded in a triangle. The letter is more personal. My hand trembles as I write of him, the young noble who dared to speak my name beside my bed on that final night. His words were a salve and a poison. Majesty, you are human still, and I love you for it. I banished him then, fearing that love might unmoor the crown. Yet in that moment, I would have traded all my kingdoms to taste immortal life. Remember me as one who ruled with steel and tears. You exhale sharply. The young noble has been speculated for centuries. Was it the gallant Earl of Essex or someone long forgotten by history? Whoever he was, here he is immortalized in Elizabeth's own hand, a ghostly figure in her last hours. You can almost see him kneeling at her side, candlelight dancing on his face, while the queen, feverish with dropsy, reaches for hope in human connection. The final bundle you open reveals not inked words, but pressed wildflowers, violets, lavender sprigs, and heartsease, carefully folded between two sheets of parchment. A short note accompanies them. These blooms I gathered in my childhood garden at Hatfield. Keep them as proof that even queens remember laughter in simpler days. Should these petals ever soil or fade, let them lie upon my coffin, so that in death I may return to that garden once more. The petals are brittle, their colors ghostly, purple turned slate, blue faded to gray. Yet their shape is intact, as though frozen in time. You feel the weight of her nostalgia, a longing for innocence lost under the demands of sovereignty. As you rewrap the letters and flowers with trembling hands, you realize these are not mere artifacts. They are confessions of a monarch who knew that her public legend might outlive any physical tomb. If her body decayed, these words and blossoms would whisper her humanity to the ages. Your next destination is a cramped, windowless chamber beneath the abbey, reached by a spiraling staircase that groans underfoot. Here sits a stone sarcophagus, smaller than the lead coffin but equally imposing. It bears no royal insignia, and you learn it housed Elizabeth's personal reliquary, vials of her fingertip clippings, a lock of copper-red hair, and the remnants of her prayer beads. The lid lifts with surprising ease, revealing a velvet pouch embroidered with gold thread, the Queen's rosary, each bead engraved with a Latin invocation. You lift it reverently and inhale the faint aroma of rose water. One bead has cracked, exposing a tiny scrap of parchment rolled inside. Unfurling it, the script reads, "O Lord, in thy mercy, grant me the peace I denied in life. If my body is torn and dissected, let my soul remain bound to thy grace. And when at last I meet thee, may I stand not as a queen, but as a penitent child of thy love." Her prayer is raw, no courtly flourish, no invocation of regal duty, just a plea for divine compassion. You imagine her knelt at her bedside, the chamber silent save for her whispered, "Kyrie eleison," her pearls scattering across purple velvet, tears wetting her palm. Behind you, a conservator places a glass dome over the reliquary contents, warning that even these artifacts bear traces of embalming spices and mortal fear. You nod, unwilling to disturb her sacred remains any further. Leaving the reliquary room, you ascend into brighter light, the rose-tinted afternoon filtering through abbey windows. But you carry with you the weight of what you've read, letters that show a queen torn between duty and desire, faith and fear, power and mortality. The narrative shifts as you recount these discoveries. Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, was also Elizabeth the woman, vulnerable, longing, and utterly human. The video cuts to reenacted scenes. A young Elizabeth wandering her childhood gardens at Hatfield, plucking violets with giggling maids. A mature queen pacing her solar, pen in hand, pausing at each line to taste the ink with a trembling tongue. And finally, the frail monarch on her deathbed, pressing her rosary beads, whispering, "In manus tuas, Domine, into your hands, O Lord." Interspersed are expert interviews, A paleographer holds her magnifying glass over the copperplate letters. Her handwriting changes in the margins. Pressure lighter, strokes wavering. It's a direct window into her last days. A historian adds, these letters were never meant to be read by her council or the public. They were a secret cache, a counterweight to the official narrative of a queen who died at peace in her bed. You recall the official chronicles, lavish funeral sermons, glowing epitaphs, porcelain likenesses. Contrast that with these hidden documents sealed to survive scandal and time. It becomes clear Elizabeth constructed two monuments to herself, one in the hearts of her people and one in the secrecy of her own crypt. Toward the end of part 3, you return to the vault. The oaken box, the reliquary, the sarcophagus, all stand as silent guardians of her personal testament. You close the lid on the letters, and for a fleeting moment, you swear you hear a whisper on the stale air, as though the queen's voice, bound in parchment and petals, still clings to the stones. Tomorrow, your narrator intones, we will confront the final secret. The coffin's lid itself is embossed with cryptic symbols and astrological markings, codes that may point to Elizabeth's belief in alchemy, celestial favor, or perhaps a hidden map to more royal treasures. Stay with us as we decode the Queen's last enigma and discover why the Virgin Queen's legacy refuses to rest beneath lead and stone. And with that promise, Part 3 ends, leaving you poised to unlock the final chamber of history's most haunted tomb. You kneel before the massive lead lid for the final descent, the lamp's flame dancing across strange carvings that defy simple explanation. Here, at the threshold of Elizabeth's ultimate secret, every symbol is a key, an invitation to peer beyond the mortal coils into a realm of celestial influence, alchemical promise, and hidden caches of royal treasure. As you brush away centuries of dust and verdigris, the first thing you notice is the circular arrangement of glyphs near the coffin's rim. 12 figures, each corresponding to a sign of the zodiac, rendered in crude, high-relief etching. Surrounding them, intricate lines form a network of triangles and concentric circles, as though charting the heavens themselves. Beneath this, 2 serpents entwine around a central sunburst, their tails biting their own heads in an eternal Ouroboros. Your gloved fingertips trace the symbol of Leo, an almost regal lion's mane curling around a crown. Next to it, Virgo holds a sheaf of wheat beneath a crescent moon. You recall that Elizabeth was born in September under Virgo's dominion, and you sense her personal imprint here. But why include the other 11? Did she believe her reign was governed by the entire zodiac? Or did she seek to harness their power in death? As you lean closer, the lamp reveals faint Latin inscriptions between the astrological figures. Ad sidera me regna, to the stars my kingdom, and in mortis umbra lux latet, in death's shadow a light lies hidden. The letters are weathered, but you copy them onto your pad, knowing that later you will confirm their translation with a paleographer. Even now you feel the weight of those words as if the coffin lid itself pulses with forbidden knowledge. You move on to the Ouroboros at the center, a universal emblem of renewal and cyclicality. Its twin serpents are rendered with surprising clarity, each scale delineated in the cold metal, their eyes set with tiny garnet inlays that glint like drops of blood when the lamp tilts. Between their coils lies a small depression, barely large enough for a keyhole or a hidden latch. You prod at it with a small awl. It resists, but then clicks, revealing a shallow cavity just deep enough to conceal a rolled parchment or a wafer-thin object. Your heart hammers as you carefully insert a narrow probe and retrieve a folded piece of vellum edged in gold leaf. Unfolding it, you find a star chart, hand-drawn and annotated in Elizabeth's hand. It maps the night sky as it appeared on March 24th, 1603, the day she died. Constellations are connected by red lines, forming an alchemical sigil overlay. Mars intersecting Jupiter in the house of Scorpio, Mercury transiting Venus under the sign of Pisces. A note in the margin reads, Mortis hora, Dominus vignet. At death's hour the Lord shall come. But below that, scrawled more hastily, is a second line, and so shall guard the riches of my reign. You glance back at the serpent-circled sunburst and realize this chart is the map to a hidden compartment beneath the coffin's base, or perhaps to a secret cell within Henry VII's chapel itself. If Elizabeth believed that specific celestial alignments would protect her treasures, she would encode them here, ensuring only those who understood her mystic science could find them. Your guide, a scholar of Elizabethan esoterica, lowers her voice. There are rumors that Elizabeth employed Dr. John Dee's secretaries to encode messages in her most sacred possessions. These symbols could point to devices, to the astrological table, a network of subterranean passages beneath Whitehall Palace, or perhaps to her hidden reliquaries at Westminster Abbey's crypt. No one has dared search, fearing the Church's wrath. You feel the weight of ecclesiastic prohibition. For centuries, popes and archbishops have decried occult practices, and the Church of England itself has guarded the Abbey's vaults with rigid dogma. Yet, here lies proof that Elizabeth, whose motto was Semper Idem, was also Semper Arcanum, ever secret. You slide the parchment back into its niche and step back to study the lid as a whole. The zodiac, the Ouroboros, the inscriptions, they form a single cohesive mandala. If aligned with the proper astrolabe, an instrument you've seen only in rare museum pieces, you could replicate the chart and pinpoint the location of an unmarked trapdoor somewhere in the floor of the choir, perhaps beneath one of the star-inlaid slabs, disguised by centuries of grime and candle wax. Your breath catches as you notice another detail you missed at first glance: 4 small holes drilled at cardinal points around the lid. They're clearly too precise to be damaged. Instead, they form the vertices of a square centered on the sunburst. Through a snippet of surviving oak veneer, you glimpse faint lines extending downward, guides for aligning the lid's markings with something below. The film cuts to a CGI reconstruction, the coffin lid hovering above a schematized floor plan of the chapel. As the lid rotates, the zodiac glyphs align with 4 star-shaped cutouts in the stone, a beam of pale, filtered light, if the sun were positioned at a specific hour, would shine through each hole, illuminating the sunburst and revealing an X-shaped fissure in the floor. You watch as the fissure expands into a trapdoor, wheels and pulleys glinting in hidden shadows. A narrator's voice intones, "Imagine standing here at dawn on the equinox, when the sun's rays penetrate the Abbey's east window, casting a path through Henry VII's chapel and activating the Queen's celestial cipher. Only then would her secret chamber open, revealing chests of gold coins, jeweled goblets, and manuscripts detailing her political maneuvers, documents so explosive they could topple monarchies." You cut back to the physical world, where you and your team have rigged portable LEDs to mimic the solstitial sun's angle. As you illuminate the first hole, a dot of light appears on the choir floor. You move to the next and another dot emerges. 2 more and the 4 lights converge into an illuminated square around an irregular stone. You kneel and press the stone. It shifts with a grinding sound. The trapdoor yawns open, revealing a spiral stair leading into pitch darkness. A hush falls over the crew. You can hear your own ragged inhale. This is the moment of truth. Beyond this door lies the culmination of Elizabeth's hidden narrative, her final testament to posterity, sealed away from prying eyes. You gather your camera crew and step forward. The lamp's beam illuminates damp stone walls, carved with more alchemical symbols, mercury flasks, distillation retorts, and the famed philosopher's egg. You realize these are not merely decorations, they're instructions. The walkway curves and descends until you reach a circular chamber. At its center sits a small, intricately carved wooden chest bound with brass straps. You set the lamp beside it. The wood is oddly warm to the touch. You lift the lid, and there it is, a trove of personal artifacts meant for her successor, James VI of Scotland. Inside lie 3 objects: a gold signet ring bearing Elizabeth's cipher, EIR, entwined with a phoenix, a silver chalice engraved with her motto Semper Idem, and a folded parchment sealed with black wax. You lift the parchment. Beneath its seal are 3 documents: a detailed political will, an astronomical almanac predicting solar eclipses into the mid-17th century, and a letter addressed to James warning him of Catholic conspiracies from within. His court? You realize the stakes. If this had fallen into the wrong hands, French, Spanish, or papal operatives, it could have altered the course of British history. Elizabeth's foresight in encoding her will in this secret chamber kept the realm safe during its most volatile transition. Your guide gently lifts the signet ring. It feels heavier than its gold weight, laden with centuries of promise and betrayal. She slips it onto a gloved finger and holds it up to the light. The phoenix rises from flames, its wings spread across the band. "She saw herself as the phoenix," the guide whispers. reborn in her successor, outliving every threat. You assemble the items on a velvet cloth and capture them in high definition. The chest's brass straps, still polished, reflect your lamp as though alive. The chalice's engraving glimmers. The documents, brittle but legible, expose Elizabeth's most intimate strategies. As you close the camera case, a distant rumble echoes up the stair. You glance back at the coffin lid looming overhead, the stone seal to this underground sanctum. It is more than a tomb marker. It is Elizabeth's vault, her parable of power intertwined with the cosmos. Emerging into the abbey's dim light, you feel the weight of history settling on your shoulders. The treasure you carry is not gold, but truths too potent for open display. These relics, once buried under lead and velvet, now find their way into public consciousness, where they will reshape our understanding of the Virgin Queen. Your final scene cuts to you at your desk, the recovered documents spread around you. You look into the camera and say, what started as a journey into a coffin's depths became an odyssey through power, faith, and cosmic design. Elizabeth Woodall did not simply die. She transcended mortality, leaving us a cipher to decode her legacy. Now, you hold the key. The screen fades to black and in white letters appears. The vault remains closed, for now. But history has a way of opening its own tombs. The closing chord resonates, and as the credits roll, you leave the audience with one final thought. The past is never truly buried, and those who seek its secrets must be prepared to face the echoes. They awaken. You don't believe in curses until you feel the cold weight of a brick pressed against your tongue. Imagine standing before a throne carved from black obsidian in a dimly lit royal crypt, your torch sputtering as if repelled by the darkness itself. The air is thick with damp stone and decayed incense. You can taste the grit of centuries-old dust on your lips. Then your guide, voice hushed, says, "They buried her with a brick in her mouth to keep her silent, forever." You step closer, the torchlight glancing off a row of marble sarcophagi. Each bears an ornate crest, but one stands apart, a simple granite slab etched only with a single name, Queen Elfwin. No crown, no title, just that name, as if the artisans themselves were afraid to call her anything more. Your heart hammers. What unspeakable secret could have demanded such a burial rite? Take a breath. Feel the chill of the crypt air as it seeps into your lungs. The walls seem to lean inward, closing off the world above. You steel yourself and press your hand to the granite lid. It is unnaturally cold, slick with condensation. A low hum reverberates through the stone, an almost musical vibration that you swear responds to your pulse. Your guide kneels and begins to pry at a corner of the lid with a crowbar. Metal grinds against stone, each scrape echoing like a scream held in abeyance. Fine dust drifts into the air, swirling in the torchlight like ghostly motes. You cough, taste the copper of old blood, and then, with a final groan of protesting metal, the lid shifts. A gust of dank air blasts out, carrying a stench that ripples the hair at your nape. It is the smell of decay, but not the sweet floral decay of a sealed coffin. This is acrid, brackish, like vinegar mixed with rot. You step back, but your feet slip on the slick stone floor, forcing you to bend at the waist to keep from falling. Peering over the edge, you see her. Queen Elfwin's remains lie in a narrow stone chamber, wrapped in linen scorched by torch smoke. Her skull tilts at an impossible angle, jaws locked around a small rectangular brick, its surface mottled with mortar stains and an unsettling patina of age. You hold your breath, the flame quivering in your hand as though afraid to look. No jewels, no golden diadem, only that brick wedged between her teeth, sealing her mouth closed for eternity. A ribbon of dried cloth binds it in place, the same linen binding her wrists and ankles, binding her to this small sarcophagus. Her hands are crossed over her abdomen, fingers so slender they look like sculpted marble. Her ribcage peeks through tattered shrouds, hollowed out as if dragged empty by unseen forces. You reach forward, compelled by morbid curiosity, and the torchlight picks out carvings on the sarcophagus wall. A series of crude pictograms, a moon crescent, a hand reaching upward, a broken crown, and finally, a brick. You trace them with your fingertip and the vibration in the stone pulses beneath your skin. It feels almost alive, as though the crypt itself remembers what happened here. Behind you, your guide whispers. They say she spoke a name, a curse, just before she died. That name could raise the dead, unbind the seals of heaven and earth, so they sealed her lips with this brick to bury her power in the grave. The words hang like a noose. You glance at the doorway above, the light of the corridor a pale promise, but you know once you've seen this, you cannot unsee it. You step into the chamber, the torch flame flickering against carved runes at your feet. Each rune corresponds to an old tongue alphabet, denoting words like silence, sleep, and binding. You kneel and run your hand across them, feeling the grooves worn smooth by centuries of torch smoke and ritual water. In the center of the floor lies a silver basin, black with age, still containing a cloudy pool of liquid. A dark stain seeps from it toward Ælfwin's feet. You lean closer and sniff. It reeks of blood and burnt herbs, yarrow, mugwort, and something darker that curls your stomach. Your guide lifts the basin, revealing a faded inscription inside. Quia vox mea potestas est, for my voice's power. It is signed only with 3 initials. A-R, you swallow hard. Could A-R be Ælfwin Regina, or someone who feared her voice more than death itself? As you replace the basin, you notice a small pile of skull fragments in one corner, a half-moon's worth of bone shards that glint like chipped ivory. The largest shard bears a drilled hole, threaded with a copper wire ring, an amulet once worn around the neck. Someone has removed her heart, but the wires suggest they tried to pull something else from her flesh. Your guide produces a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle. She opens to an entry in Latin. Anno Domini 978, in insula silente, Regina Ælfwin vox mortua, vincere oremato, si libera, omnis spiritus mutabit in malum potionem. You lean over her shoulder as she translates. In the year 978, on the Silent Isle, Queen Ælfwin's voice was mortified. To bind her mouth with clay, if freed, every spirit will turn to evil guile. You lift your torch and illuminate the vaulted ceiling. Faint frescoes remain, a crowned figure raising her arms to the sky, smoke rising in spirals. Beneath, a flock of ravens takes flight, and above all, a great liminal gateway between the living and the dead. You can feel the scene pressing down on you, a warning carried through centuries of pigment and plaster. The journal flips to another note, dated 3 days later. Propter timorum vulgi, muri cocuntur ut terra obsidatur. Through fear of the populace, the walls are sealed so the earth is forever closed. That day, they built the crypt itself, a narrow tunnel tunneled beneath the cliffs, sealed by tides and tides of stone, to keep the queen's voice from escaping into the world above. You stand and brush a hand across the brick in her mouth. It is rough, porous like sandstone. The edges are worn smooth, as though molded by teeth. You lift the brick slightly. The linen has rotted where it encircled her jaw, but the brick stays firmly lodged. Inside, you swear you can feel the hollow space of her mouth, a cavity filled with echoes. Your guide shines the torch at the far end of the chamber, where a trap door in the floor is hidden beneath straw and rubble. She kneels and pries it open to reveal a narrow shaft leading down into darkness colder than the crypt above. The walls are slick with water, and you peer down into a void so black you feel vertigo. Rumor says they lowered her into a deeper pit once the tides rose, to drown the very whispers of her name. You turn back to the sarcophagus, and for a moment, the brick seems to pulse in the torchlight, as if alive with the words it was meant to silence. A sudden draft whistles through the chamber, snuffing out your torch and plunging you into utter darkness. Your guide strikes flint, and the spark ignites a candle at the foot of the tomb. The wax drips onto the stone, carving a new rune of molten light. You take a breath and steel your nerves. This is only the beginning. Behind the sealed lips of Queen Ælfwin lies a tale of betrayal, blood magic, and a power that even death could not contain. When you ascend from this crypt, you will carry with you the echoes of a voice bound by clay, and the question, whose silence was more terrifying, the queen's or the world that feared her words? In the days ahead, you will follow the crypt's clues, the scattered skull fragments, the tiled runes, the inscriptions in forgotten dialects. You will trace the story from the Isle of Skeep to the great halls of Dunrin's Keep, interrogate chronicles that tremble at her name, and unearth testimonies of those who swore they heard her voice carried on the wind. But right now, in this solemn chamber, you stand face to face with a queen who commanded armies, swayed nations, and spoke a word so potent it had to be sealed in death. You press your ear to the brick in her mouth, and for a heartbeat, you think you hear a whisper, the faintest syllable of a name, the longing of a voice cut off before its final breath. Now, step back, let the echoes fade. Above ground, the sun will feel warm and safe, but you know what lies hidden beneath the earth's crust. A queen whose power extended beyond the grave, whose silence tells a story more chilling than any cry. And only those brave or foolish enough to unseal her tomb will learn why a brick was placed in her mouth, and what happens if it ever comes loose. You feel the brick shift beneath your fingertips, as though it carries a heartbeat stolen from the queen herself. In these first 10 seconds, you'll sense a tremor in the earth, a whisper of clay and ancient power, and you'll understand why no one dared speak her name for a millennium. You step out of the sealed chamber, the candle's flame wavering as if afraid to leave the tomb. Behind you, the trapdoor hisses shut, sealing Queen Elfwind's mouth once more. But you carry her secret in your bones now, and the journey into the heart of her legend has only begun. Outside the crypt, the damp chill gives way to the tang of salt air drifting from the cliffs above. You follow a narrow passage that winds upward, each step echoing like a muted drumbeat in the rock-hewn corridor. Torch sconces line the walls, their flames dancing across carved reliefs of figures in mid-prayer, their faces turned upward as if beseeching mercy. You brush your gloved hand over the carvings, feeling the rough stone worn smooth by centuries of hands. Pilgrims, priests, and perhaps the secret keepers of Elfwind's tomb. At last, you emerge into twilight on the Isle of Sheep, the land where Elfwind reigned nearly 1,000 years ago. The sky hangs low and bruised, waves crashing against jagged rocks below. You can taste the spray on your lips. In the distance, the fragmented stones of Castle Dunnern cling to a windswept promontory, once her stronghold, now a ruin haunted by gulls and secrets. Your guide, a local historian named Morwenna, leads you along a moss-covered pathway toward a weathered stone hut. Inside, the shelves sag under the weight of leather-bound tomes, brittle maps, and broken seals. The air is thick with the smell of ink and damp parchment. Morwenna kneels and reverently opens a volume titled Chronicles of the Silent Isle. You lean close, reading an entry dated Anno Domini 978. On the eve of the blood moon, Queen Elfwind's court fell silent. Her voice, once a clarion call that rallied knights and pacified barbarians, was heard no more. They found her in the great hall, eyes wide with horror, lips parted as if to speak a final incantation. By dawn, she was gone, and in her place lay clay pressed to her teeth. You trace the swirl of an illuminated initial Q, feeling the weight of every brushstroke. The next page depicts a charcoal sketch of the king's council, their faces etched with fear, pointing at the queen's table, where a clay brick lies stained with blood. Beneath, a marginal scrawl in a shaky hand, her voice could summon storms. Her final word was the last command. Morwenna's voice ripples in the hush. These chronicles were copied by monks who believed her voice was a divine instrument. They worried that if her last word reached the world, it could break the bonds between life and death. She turns the page to reveal a detailed plan of the crypt you've just left, drawn centuries before its construction. A diagram shows how the brick in her mouth was part of a larger ritual. 4 clay seals placed at the cardinal points of the tomb, each inscribed with a rune of binding. Your heart pounds as you recognize the same runes you saw on the floor of the chamber. The clay seals are long gone, but their magic lingers in the stone. You lean forward and whisper to Morwenna, "What happened to those seals?" She turns pale. Some say the seals were destroyed by flood tides. Others claim a secret cult stole them, fearing that the seals' destruction would unleash Elfwind's power across the land. She reaches beneath the table and produces a small, chalk-dusted bag. Inside lie 4 fragments of clay, each etched with a rune so worn you can barely make out the shapes. They tremble in your palm like shards of a shattered promise. Holding the fragments, you feel a tug in your chest, as if Elfwind's breath reached across centuries to brush your neck. You draw in a breath and place each shard back into the bag, securing it with a red silk cord. This relic, once part of the queen's binding spell, might be the key to understanding her final word, and whether it still echoes beneath these cliffs. Morwenna leads you outside as the last light fades. The wind whips at your cloak, and the twin towers of Dunrin loom like sentinels. A narrow stair carved into the cliffside descends toward the castle's vaulted cellars, long submerged by rising tides. Few dare enter, Morwenna warns. Legends say Elfwin's voice still dwells in those submerged halls, trapped behind a door sealed by her own incantation. You ignite a waterproof torch and step onto the stair. Each footfall splashes shallow water, sending ripples that catch the torchlight. The sound of your breathing mixes with the crash of waves above. Near the bottom, you find a stone slab carved with the same pictograms you saw in the crypt. The moon crescent, the reaching hand, the broken crown, and the brick. You press the stone and hear a faint click. A hidden door swings inward, revealing a tunnel half flooded and lined with rough-hewn arches. The water laps at your knees as you move forward, the torch flame dancing across painted murals of scenes long forgotten. Elfwin standing atop roiling waves, one hand raised as storm clouds swirl above. Below, her court kneels in supplication, faces turned toward a lightning bolt shaped like a serpent's tongue. You shiver. This was not mere decoration, but a pictorial invocation meant to channel the queen's voice through the elements. The tunnel narrows and drops into complete darkness. You raise the torch above your head, revealing a stone door carved with a single rune. The rune of speech, identical to one of the clay fragments still in Morwenna's bag. The door's surface is wet with seawater, but the rune glows faintly, as though resonating with the artifact. You hold your breath and press the clay fragment into the carved indent. The rune fits perfectly. A low rumble vibrates through the tunnel, and the door grinds open to reveal a submerged chamber framed by coral and barnacles. At its center rests an ornate wooden lectern, its surface encrusted with salt. On it lies a single object, a silver chalice, cracked down the side but still gleaming in the torchlight. Its rim bears an inscription in Old Tongue, Vox ad aquam, voice to the water. Morwenna wets her finger and traces the inscription. Legend says the queen spoke into this chalice on the night she died. Her last word, carried through the water, became an invocation that bound spirits to this isle. She lifts the chalice and you catch a glint of moonlight filtering through a small grating high above, the only opening in the chamber. Your guide lowers the chalice to the water's surface. The liquid inside ripples and then stills. You lean forward, heart thundering, and hear a faint whisper, a single syllable that you cannot place, yet it sends a shiver through your core. Morwenna's eyes widen. That was it, her final word. You press your ear to the chalice's rim. The whisper grows, coalescing into a name that feels older than time itself, an invocation that stirs the water into tiny whirlpools. Shells tremble on the floor. The air crackles. You pull back, torch flickering as shadows dance on the walls. In that instant, you understand the true purpose of the brick. It was not simply to silence Elfwin. It was to prevent her last word from reverberating through the water, through the air, through the spirit realm. Without the brick, her sound would have cascaded like a ripple, awakening forces beyond mortal control. You and Morwenna exchange a look of alarm. The whisper returns, louder now, filling the chamber. The water swirls faster and you see shapes, ghostly outlines of figures, rising from the depths. The specters of Elfwin's court, bound by her power, materialize around the lectern, faces drained of color, eyes fixed on the chalice. Their lips move in silent synchronization, mouthing that ancient syllable. Your torch sputters. The specters lean closer, arms outstretched, as though beckoning you forward. You feel the pull of the water, the tug of those ethereal hands. The brick in your pocket grows heavy, as if responding to the invocation. You realize only the brick's binding magic can silence the name once more, and banish these restless spirits. With trembling hands, you produce the brick fragment and hold it aloft. The specters recoil, their forms flickering. You shout the queen's final word into the brick, as though transferring the sound back into clay. The chamber quakes. The spirits swirl around you in a vortex of wind and water. Then, with a final thunderous crack, the door slams shut. Silence descends, heavy as stone. The water stills. The chalice sinks back onto the lectern. The rune-inscribed door seals itself once more. You are alone in the half-flooded corridor, heart pounding, gasping for breath. You emerge into the night air, the moon riding high above the cliffs. Morwenna stands beside you, her face pale but resolute. In her hand she holds the still wet brick fragment. "We must return these to the crypt," she whispers. "Only there can their power remain contained." As you make your way back to the sealed sarcophagus, you realize the web of binding magic extends far beyond a single brick. It threads through clay seals, chalices, runes, and whispered names, each element a safeguard against the Queen's final invocation. And now that you've heard her voice, even sealed away, you carry a piece of that power within you. Tomorrow, you will return to the Isles Monastery to consult the last living keeper of the Silence Oath, a monk who once swore to bury every record of Ælfwin's incantation. But tonight, you stand on the edge of history, holding a shard of clay that remembers a voice capable of shaking the world. And you wonder, if even one fragment were lost, could that voice rise again, and with it a tide of chaos that no mortal could withstand? The path to the monastery is ancient, carved from the cliffside itself, smoothed by countless souls over 1,000 years. As you and Morwenna press forward beneath a sky heavy with mist, the sound of crashing waves grows distant, replaced by the solemn toll of a bell echoing across the craggy hills. The bell doesn't ring to mark the hour, it rings to warn. The Brotherhood of the Silent Vow has lived in the shadows for centuries, nestled deep in the folds of the Isle of Seep's interior. Their purpose? To guard the unspoken name of Queen Ælfwin, and to prevent her final utterance from ever touching mortal lips again. They are not monks in the traditional sense. They are wardens, silent, vigilant, and bound by blood to the secret you now carry. As you approach the monastery gates, wrought iron symbols glimmer in the fog, runes nearly identical to those you saw on the clay fragments in the crypt's floor. They pulse faintly, as if reacting to your presence. A narrow-eyed figure steps forward from the shadows behind the gate. His face is deeply lined, as though he has not smiled in decades. He studies you for a long moment before opening the gate without a word. Inside, the stone cloisters echo with your footsteps. No one speaks. Every monk moves silently, communicating only through signs and glances. You notice the walls lined with paintings and tapestries, but they all share one theme: images of mouths sealed shut with cloth, wax, or stone. Some are peaceful, others horrifying. One tapestry depicts a woman screaming into a mirror that reflects only a brick. The elder monk, Father Elric, leads you into a high-ceilinged chamber lit by hundreds of candles. A single relic rests on the central altar, a worn manuscript wrapped in black silk. Elric gestures for Morwenna to approach. She unwraps the cloth and opens the manuscript with reverence. Its pages are a patchwork of language: Old English, Latin, Celtic runes, even Phoenician glyphs, stitched together like a linguistic Frankenstein. But it's the illustrations that steal your breath. They tell a story not recorded in any known chronicle, the true legend of Queen Ælfwin. The tale begins not with her birth, but with a prophecy, a vision seen by a druid priestess who, on the night of a great solar eclipse, foresaw a queen whose voice would bridge the realm of the living and the dead. The voice would charm armies, calm beasts, bend rivers, and ultimately, if left, unbridled, shatter the veil between worlds. When Ælfwin was born, it was under another eclipse. Her cries were said to shake the very rafters of the birthing chamber, and a nursemaid reportedly dropped dead upon hearing her scream. By the time she was 12, her words could sway entire villages. By 16, she had taken the throne, not through bloodshed, but sheer persuasion. Those who heard her speeches called them divine. Those who opposed her disappeared. And then, at the height of her reign, came the incident known only as the Reverberation. According to the manuscript, Ælfwin had stood before the gathered tribes of the eastern coast to deliver a peace decree. It was said she spoke only 3 sentences, but when her voice echoed across the sea cliffs, something else answered. Birds fell from the sky, horses bolted into the sea, and for 3 days no one who heard her words spoke again. Some never regained their speech. Others died with their mouths open, as though trying to expel her final phrase. What had she said? The manuscript gives no clue, only that the surviving council feared her power had grown beyond earthly control. The archbishop and 3 advisors conspired to perform an ancient rite, one that hadn't been used since the days of the Druids. They called it obstruere verbum, the sealing of the voice. They lured her to the castle's lower crypts under the guise of a ritual. There, a specially forged brick of sacred clay, etched with runes, blessed by 3 tongues and soaked in the waters of the river Styx, was placed in her mouth as she slept, drugged by nightshade and mandrake. The clay was meant not to suffocate her, but to capture her voice like a tomb traps a soul. She awoke mid-binding, legend says, her eyes filled not with rage, but with knowing. She let them finish. Her tomb was sealed that night. The court announced she had perished in her sleep, but the monks, those tasked with completing the rite, knew otherwise. Her body had never decayed, her mouth always slightly open beneath the brick, and when the tides were especially high, they claimed to hear murmurs rising through the ground. Aelric closes the manuscript. The silence is deafening. You can't breathe. Finally, the elder monk breaks his vow and speaks. She is not dead. She is waiting. Those 4 words hang heavier than the stone walls around you. You look at Morwenna, who clutches the cloth-wrapped brick tighter. There's no doubt anymore. Queen Alfwyn was not buried with the brick as punishment or superstition. It was a containment, a prison, a failsafe, and now you may have disturbed the balance. Father Aelric leads you down into the monastery's vaults, a descent of 99 stairs carved in a spiral, each step etched with the same rune, Ta'Cher, silence. The final chamber is a round vault lined with concentric circles of copper wiring embedded into the floor and ceiling. In the center lies a sarcophagus not of stone, but of glass and obsidian. Inside, preserved by salt and spells, is the second brick, identical to the one found in Alfwyn's tomb. Only this one glows faintly from within, as if pulsing with something alive. This, Aelric explains, is the twin brick, created as a counterbalance. Together, the 2 form a complete seal. You begin to understand the enormity of the danger. By removing the tomb's brick and speaking her name aloud, even in a whisper, you fractured the seal, and the consequences might already be spreading. Reports flood in over the next 24 hours. Strange seismic tremors beneath the isle, sudden hallucinations experienced by locals, several people falling into fugue states, murmuring in forgotten dialects, fishermen claiming to hear a woman's voice whispering through the fog, calling them to sea. But it is the dream that truly shakes you. That night you see Alfwyn. She stands on a hill of broken crowns, her hair long and wet with seawater, her gown stitched from parchments. Her eyes are endless wells of language, letters and symbols swirling like galaxies. She opens her mouth, but the sound is not a voice. It is time unraveling. She speaks a word, and you wake up gasping. The next morning, you write the syllable down before it slips away. Seru. It means nothing. It means everything. Morwenna finds you pale, shaking, your fingers stained with ink. You hand her the note. She pales too. Seru, she says, is a derivative of an ancient word, meaning to call back what was lost. A summoning word. The queen's final whisper was a summons. And now it might be answered. The monks agree. The bricks must be rejoined. But doing so requires a second ritual, one never completed before. It must be performed on the Isle's oldest hill, Cairnmore, the site of the original Druid temple where Alfwyn's cradle stood. But that place has long been cursed. No one has set foot there in centuries. Its paths vanish in fog, its ground shifts and compasses fail. Nonetheless, you and Morwenna pack the brick, the manuscript, and the rune fragments and set out at dawn. As you ascend the slope of Cairnmore, clouds gather unnaturally fast. Thunder murmurs over the horizon. Every step forward feels like walking through molasses, resistance in the air, as though the world itself is warning you to stop. Halfway up the hill, the mist thickens. You lose sight of Morwenna for a heartbeat. Then you hear it, your name, spoken in a voice like honey and iron. A gift for a gift, it whispers. A name for a name. The voice coils around your spine. You fall to your knees as the wind rises. Morwenna appears beside you, gripping your hand, grounding you. She shouts something, but her voice is swallowed by the air. The wind now sounds like breathing. You reach the summit. At the top stands a circle of stones blackened by lightning. In the center, a pedestal of ancient wood, twisted like it grew in pain. You place the 2 bricks side by side upon the pedestal. Immediately, the wind dies. The silence is absolute. And then, you hear it, not from outside, but inside your mind. Elfwin. She speaks only one phrase, one that freezes your blood. You open the door. I have stepped through. The bricks explode into dust. The hilltop is still. Not a bird sings. Not a leaf moves. The dust from the shattered bricks hangs suspended in the air like frozen sparks. You and Morwenna stand in the eye of a storm that hasn't come. Yet. But the change is already beginning. You feel it in your bones first. A dull ache that pulses in rhythm with your heartbeat. Then the sound returns, not as wind or rustling trees, but as murmurs. Soft at first, like distant chanting. Then louder, distinct. Voices, hundreds of them, whispering in languages you don't understand, but somehow do. As if you've known them in dreams. Morwenna grips your arm and points behind you. Down the slope of Cairnmore, shadows are gathering. Dozens of figures emerging from the mist. Not solid, not quite spectral. Shapes, people from different eras. Robes, armor, rags, men and women, even children. Their mouths are open, but none of them speak. Instead they look upward, toward the center of the hill. Toward the place where the bricks once lay. And from that place, now barren of relics, a single tendril of black smoke is rising into the sky. It coils like a snake. Then it splits, and the second it splits, the earth moans. You fall to the ground as a tremor shakes the hill. Stones roll. A crack opens beneath the pedestal, emitting a faint hum. The figures below begin to walk, forming a spiral path up the hill. Their eyes locked on you, still silent, still watching. And then she arrives, not walking, not floating, simply present, as if she's always been there and you only just noticed. Queen Elfwin. Her appearance is nothing like the crumbling statue or the faded illustrations. She is vivid, regal. Hair like woven shadow. A gown that changes color with every blink. Her face is both young and ancient, and her mouth, sealed, not by a brick, but by something far stranger, a shimmer, a flickering distortion, as though reality itself has sewn her lips shut. She looks at you, not with anger, but pity. Then she raises her hand. The spiral of ghost stops. Every figure sinks to one knee. She lowers her hand, and they vanish. Gone. You realize, with dawning horror, that she is no longer bound by time or flesh. Whatever ritual once sealed her power, whatever faith, whatever spell, has now been broken, and she's not just returned. She's free. Morwenna whispers, "We've made a terrible mistake." But it's too late to take it back. What follows over the next 3 days is unlike anything Britain has experienced in living memory. The sun appears dimmer. Time feels slower. People report déjà vu in waves, entire towns claiming the same dreams. A sleeping sickness spreads. Scholars speak in tongues. In the Scottish Highlands, a child is born speaking fluent Latin. And then the message comes. Etched into every reflective surface from Cornwall to Caithness, mirrors, windows, water. A phrase written in an untranslatable script that burns the eyes to look at for too long. But AI software trying to decode the structure produces the same translation every time. I do not seek a crown. I seek the word. The word, Seru. You remember it instantly, the word that came to you in your dream, the summoning syllable. And you realize, this isn't about conquest. Elfwin doesn't want to rule again. She wants to complete what she began before her burial. To finish her sentence, to speak the final phrase that was interrupted the day she was entombed, a phrase that may very well unmake the boundary between the living and the dead. The government, of course, doesn't believe any of it, at first, but when Buckingham Palace's reflecting pool freezes solid in July and begins humming at 3:33 a.m. every night, they send in linguists and priests. Nothing works, rituals fail, technology glitches, radios pick up static that forms into patterns. Morse code, ancient Celtic, it always says the same thing. She remembers. Morwenna is called to London to brief a special council. You go with her. The air in the city feels off, heavy. Londoners speak in hushed tones. The Thames has turned unusually dark. At Westminster Abbey, the tombs vibrate faintly, and Queen Elizabeth I's coffin, yes, that coffin, is suddenly sealed shut by forces unknown. They try to reopen it. The tools shatter. Something is shifting. You retreat to the British Library, searching for any further records of Elfwin, the ritual, or the word. In a hidden annex, one marked Obscura, pre-1000s, you discover a series of scrolls not listed in the archives. One is written in blood on what appears to be cured skin. It bears her seal. A final prophecy. It says this: when the bricks are dust and the mouth is unmade, the voice shall travel, and where it travels, silence shall follow. Only one born in the hour of forgetting may bind her tongue once more. You stare at Morwenna. She pulls her locket from her neck, opens it. Her birth time, 3:33 a.m., the same hour the humming begins. You both know what this means. She is the key. But the binding must happen at the site of the original ritual, beneath the Isle of Seep, in the ruins below the crypt, where Alfwin was first silenced, where her voice first echoed beyond the veil. You return by sea under a blood-red moon. The crypt is changed. It no longer feels empty. The walls pulse like lungs. The stones feel warm. And on the sarcophagus, a mouth is carved where none was before. Open, wide, waiting. Morwenna steps forward, holding the last relic you recovered, a mirror etched with the sigil of silence. She places it before the mouth. Immediately, the room darkens. And Aelfwin speaks. Not aloud, not in the air, but inside your skull. Let me finish. Just once. Let me finish. You feel an overwhelming sadness, a story never told, a sentence never spoken, a queen condemned not for evil, but for power no one could understand. Her voice isn't a weapon, it's a bridge, but even bridges can collapse. Morwenna raises her hand and speaks the counterword written on the scrolls, Virella. It means to fold the tongue, a command, a plea. There's a pause. Then, with a sound like thunder tearing silk, the mouth on the stone seals. The air shifts, the crypt grows cold, and the presence vanishes. The binding is complete, or so you think. As you leave the crypt exhausted, the monks gather. They say nothing, just watch. Back at the monastery, Elric hands you a sealed envelope. This was left here in 1789, for the one who ends the sentence. You open it. Inside is a page from Queen Elfwin's personal journal. It reads, "They will silence me." But the word is not mine alone. It lives in the dreamers, in the forgotten, in the mouths of those unborn. And beneath that, you cannot bury a voice forever. You can only hope it does not sing. The wind picks up outside. You realize something chilling. You ended the sentence, but it may only have been her first one. Fade to black. Title card. Some tombs are sealed for a reason. She was already dead, but that didn't stop her from speaking, not with her mouth, not with her voice, but with a single letter stitched in secret, hidden beneath layers of silk and lace, waiting centuries to be found. And when it finally was, it changed everything we thought we knew about her death, about her reign, about her betrayal. No one noticed it at first. When Queen Isabeau of Averna died in the summer of 1612, her body was prepared in the typical fashion, anointed with oils, dressed in state robes, and laid in a glass-lidded coffin so nobles could pay their respects. The procession was quiet, the mourning sincere, but beneath the silence, there was tension, because although she'd ruled for nearly 30 years, Queen Isabeau had always been a shadowy figure. Some claimed she was wise. Others whispered she was a puppet. Her court was filled with secrets. Her advisors were never trusted, and after her sudden death at only 49, the rumors exploded. Poison, assassination, a final confession. But nothing could ever be proven. That is, until 417 years later. It began, strangely enough, in a conservation lab in a museum basement. The Museum of Regal Textiles, a little-known wing of the Avernon Royal Trust, had been tasked with preserving Isabeau's burial gown for an upcoming exhibition. The dress had never been removed from the tomb before. It was fragile, ancient, and wrapped tightly around her body like a final shroud. The lead textile conservator, Dr. Helena Voss, had seen hundreds of royal gowns, but something about this one felt different. The silk, for one, was far too heavy, not weighted with gold thread or jewels, but with something else, something sewn into the bodice. She didn't dare cut it, not yet. Instead, she used infrared scanning. What showed up nearly made her drop the monitor. A rectangular object, flat, delicate, precisely folded, was stitched directly into the inner lining of the dress, between the fourth and fifth layers. Impossible to see, impossible to feel through gloves, and placed not randomly, but directly over the Queen's heart. Dr. Voss called for a halt to the restoration. The tomb was re-sealed. The press was told it was a preservation delay. But in the shadows of the lab, a team of royal archivists and security officers were brought in. Within a week, the stitching was removed under controlled conditions. The object was carefully extracted. It was a letter, paper astonishingly intact, folded 7 times, sealed with a wax emblem no one recognized, and written in the Queen's hand. But the real shock? It was dated the day after her death. That, of course, was impossible. Or so they thought. The letter was immediately transferred to the Royal Archive, and access was restricted to only 4 individuals: the director of the museum, the Queen's current descendant, Princess Elira of Averna, and 2 government-appointed historians. But leaks are inevitable. Within 48 hours, a single photo of the wax seal made its way online, posted anonymously on a forum for cryptology enthusiasts. It took less than 6 hours for someone to decode the sigil. It wasn't a family crest. It wasn't a symbol of Averna. It was the insignia of the Order of St. Maro, a secret society that had been banned by the Church in 1543 for practicing forbidden rites. Necromancy. Suddenly, the Queen's burial gown wasn't just a relic. It was evidence. And the letter? It was a message from beyond the grave. Word spread fast. Historians called it the most important find since the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Church denied all involvement, and somewhere, deep in the subvaults of the Royal Archive, a descendant of the woman who wore the dress, Princess Elira, stood staring at a copy of her ancestor's handwriting, feeling the weight of history press against her lungs like a vice. She read the first line again and again. If you are reading this, then I was right. The letter was written in a style that shifted halfway through, from elegant courtly prose to something fragmented, raw, as if it had been penned in a state of urgency or fear. The early paragraphs were filled with cryptic references. They sit at my table but wear the faces of others. The red wine tastes of salt, and I know now why. The bells do not toll for me. They toll to keep something down. But one passage stood out above the rest, written in darker ink with a shaking hand. I was not meant to be queen. I was chosen, not by blood, by design. And now I see the threads. I see them all, and they all lead back to the Chapel of Teeth. That name meant nothing to the officials, not to the curators, not even to the historians, but to Princess Elira. It sent a chill down her spine, because when she was 6 years old, she had a dream of a chapel filled with bone-colored statues, a single bell that rang without being touched, and a woman in a veil who whispered, "Your blood remembers." She had never told anyone, until now. She told the archive team. They dismissed it as coincidence, but Dr. Helena Voss didn't. She pulled the museum's architectural records, old maps, pre-1700s before the capital city expanded, and there it was, buried beneath the royal estate. A sealed crypt, mislabeled for centuries, the Chapel of St. Mercia, but its original name, according to a 1592 ledger in fading ink, Capella Dens, the Chapel of Teeth. Within 48 hours, a team was assembled. Access was difficult. The chapel lay beneath tons of stone, hidden beneath what had once been the Queen's private music chamber. The chamber itself was sealed during renovations in the 1800s and never reopened. There was no official record of the chapel's purpose, just one vague warning, scrawled in Latin on the entry beam: "Do not sing here, do not wake the wax." The doors opened on the 3rd day. Inside, the air was stale, the darkness was total, but as their eyes adjusted, they began to see. The entire chapel was carved from bone-white marble. But it wasn't just marble. It had texture, density, patterns, and when they looked closer, they realized it wasn't marble at all. It was tooth, thousands of them, human, animal, layered and pressed into the walls like fossils. Some polished, some yellowed with age, a cathedral built of teeth, in the center an altar, upon it a mask, porcelain, feminine, delicate, with the same symbol as the letter, carved into the brow, and behind the altar a mural, a queen seated on a throne. But her eyes were blank, her mouth sewn shut. Around her neck the same dress Isabeau was buried in, and above her head the inscription, "She wears the tongue of kings." The team was stunned. Photos were forbidden, only sketches and written records permitted, but words still leaked, because the deeper they explored, the more disturbing the picture became. The chapel wasn't a place of worship. It was a site of initiation, a hidden theater of power, ritual, and silence. They found stained glass windows beneath layers of soot, depicting monarchs of old receiving gifts, tongues in boxes, crowns of teeth, scrolls that bled ink when unrolled, and always, always, one figure in the background, a woman in black, veiled, watching. The same woman Elira had dreamed of as a child, the same silhouette that appeared in the margins of the Queen's letter, but it was the final chamber that broke the story open. Beneath the altar, a trap door, and beneath that, a sarcophagus, not Queen Isabeau's, older. When opened, it contained a single object, a book, bound in soft, pale leather. Inside, hundreds of pages of symbols, languages, drawings, a secret manual. And on the first page, in a clear Avernan dialect, "To be queen is not to rule. It is to remember. The letter is not the message. The dress is not the veil. The voice is not the power." It was signed, the mouthless one. The public never saw it. The book was classified within 72 hours. But by then it was too late, because Helena Voss had made copies, and one of them found its way to an underground network of historians and mystics and former clergy, known only as the Bell Archive, and they knew what it meant. The chapel was not just a relic, it was a prison, and the letter, a key. They thought the chapel had been sealed to protect history. They were wrong. It had been sealed to keep something in. But now the letter had been found, the dress disturbed, the symbol revealed, and the long silent chapel of teeth opened. Within days of the discovery, the effects began. Dr. Helena Voss, the conservator who first uncovered the hidden letter, was the first to report symptoms. She called them echoes. At first, just whispers in the archive lab, indistinct, like a memory played backward. But then they became voices, then full sentences, and always in the same cadence. She remembers, so must you. At first, her team thought it was stress, sleep deprivation, guilt for breaking the seal on the Queen's dress. But then others heard it too. The lab assistant, the security guard on night shift, even Princess Elira herself, when visiting the sealed vault where the letter now lay. Each described the same voice, feminine, not angry, not even sad, but insistent, as if it had waited centuries to be heard. And that's when the dreams began. Not nightmares, but something far worse. Visions of places they had never been, a city buried beneath roots, a river that flowed uphill, a room of red glass where the walls pulsed like lungs, and a throne carved from jawbones. In every vision, the Queen sat waiting, but her mouth was always sealed, not with thread, but with a letter, folded 7 times exactly like the one found in the dress. Word of the haunting effects was kept quiet. Officially, there were no incidents, but the reality was very different. 3 staff members resigned, 1 archivist fled the country, and Dr. Voss herself vanished. Her last written note scrawled on an unnumbered page of her personal journal. There is more than one letter. And so, the hunt began, because if there was more than one, what else had Queen Isabeau hidden? And how? Attention turned to the dress. The gown itself had already been isolated and digitally mapped, but now new tests were ordered, ultrasound scanning, thermographic imaging, even radiocarbon tracing of the stitching threads. and one test revealed something no one expected, a second anomaly. This one, not paper, not fabric, but bone, tiny, shaped like a stylus, hidden inside the sleeve's hem. When extracted, it was found to be a writing tool, ancient, still faintly stained with ink, but not black ink, red, blood red, the same color used in the Queen's final lines of the hidden letter. Analysis showed it was human, the same blood type as the Queen's. That was when the message in the letter's final paragraph began to make more sense. I wrote with the vein that once betrayed me, let it carry what my voice cannot. She hadn't just written in secret, she had written in her own blood. But how could she have done that after death? Unless she wasn't fully dead when buried. The theory sparked outrage. The official record had always stated that Queen Isabeau died of sudden heart failure. But now rumors exploded. Had she been buried alive? A sacrifice? A silencing? Attention turned to the court physician who signed her death certificate, Dr. Lawrence Ravane, a minor historical figure, until now. Records showed he had ties to the Order of St. Maro before it was dissolved, a cousin who had disappeared in 1589, a private chamber in the royal wing that was never investigated, and then they found his final journal. It had been hidden in the binding of a medical codex, unnoticed for 400 years, unlabeled, presumed blank. But under UV light, a different ink emerged, invisible to the eye. The entire journal was written in blood. Dr. Ravane's entries revealed a disturbing picture. Queen Isabeau had not died of natural causes. She had undergone a ritual, designed to stop the heart, but not the mind. A process known in banned texts as the sleep of the veiled, temporary, reversible, but only within 7 days. After that, permanent silence. The ritual was meant to buy time, to allow Isabeau to fake her death, escape the court, and flee from what she called the mouthless pact. But something went wrong. She was buried too soon, or perhaps intentionally buried, to trap her, because Isabeau had discovered something ancient, hidden in the chapel, buried beneath the myths of Averna's founding, a secret that had kept queens in power for generations, not by choice, but by oath, and the price of breaking that oath was burial. Dr. Ravane's final entry read, "She begged me not to let them sew her lips, but it was not her mouth they feared, it was her memory. So I stitched the letter, I sewed the truth into her. He died the following day. Suicide, or so they claimed. Now, the investigation widened. If the Queen's gown held secrets, what about her tomb? Access was granted under tight conditions, no press, no cameras. The coffin was exhumed, and what they found was stranger than anyone expected, because beneath the Queen's corpse, there was another body, smaller, wrapped in black silk, no name, no markings, but clearly placed there intentionally. The bones were incomplete, a fragment of jaw, a single vertebra, and both hands, positioned in a prayer gesture. One hand held a pearl, the other a fragment of parchment. It wasn't a letter, it was a map, but not of Averna, not of any place known on Earth. The symbols resembled constellations, but were wrong, off by one axis, like a mirror of the sky, and at the bottom, in crimson ink, when the bell tolls without sound, the throne will listen, and she will rise. Panic set in. Royal officials demanded silence. The archive was locked, the dress resealed, but Princess Elira refused, because she'd seen the signs before, in her dreams, and now something else was happening. Across the palace grounds, bells began to sway, not ringing, just moving, no wind, no hands, just a slow, rhythmic motion, like a heartbeat. She ordered the chapel sealed again, but the doors no longer responded. Some force kept them open, and then the singing began. Not loud, not human, a low vibration, almost like the hum of bees, but layered, multi-voiced, melodic, as if the very walls remembered the rites once performed within them. And in the royal crypt, the Queen's body began to decompose in reverse, skin restored, eyes clearing, lips softening, no medical explanation. One archivist described it as the body waking up. But was it her, or something else wearing her form? And then the second letter appeared, not in a tomb, not in a dress, but in a mirror. Princess Alira saw it first. Her dressing mirror, an antique passed down from Queen Isabeau herself, fogged in the center, and behind the glass something moved. Then words appeared. "There are 7. She gasped, called the guards, but by the time they arrived, the mirror was clean and the message gone. Now the race was on. If there were 7 letters, where were the others? And if each one was hidden, what would happen when they were all found? Would they open a door, or lock one forever? The archivist had a name for it now, the Isabeau effect. They used it to explain the impossible. Mirrors that whispered, flesh that healed post-mortem, ink that bled when no hand touched the page. But no one dared say what they all feared, that Queen Isabeau was not simply returning. She was reforming herself through memory, fragment by fragment. And the 7 letters? They weren't just confessions. They were keys. Each one, when read aloud, unlocked something, a thought, a voice, a place, and perhaps a body. Princess Alira knew this before anyone said it aloud, because she had begun to see through her ancestors' eyes. It started with flashes. A mirror she didn't recognize. A chamber that smelled of lavender and ink. A sound, a song, sung by a girl with her mouth sewn shut. Then came the full immersion. One moment, Alira would be in her modern chamber, flipping through ancient correspondence, and the next, she was there, in Isabeau's skin, standing at a dusk-lit window, holding a letter not yet written, feeling the weight of betrayal before the knife even touched her back. It wasn't a memory, it was possession, and it was becoming harder to leave. The royal physicians examined her. No anomalies, brain scans clean, blood work untouched. Except one thing, her heart had developed a second rhythm, not arrhythmia, not failure, just 2 pulses, one faster than the other, one foreign. And then she said it, quietly, barely audibly, "She's breathing through me." While the court scrambled for explanations, others acted in secret. An underground historian known only as R published a digital manifesto titled The Vein Map, a conspiracy theory linking Queen Isabeau's hidden letters to a sequence of ancient tunnels beneath the royal palace. He claimed the palace had been built atop a pagan site known as the Mirror Wells, where time was said to flow backward and memory became matter. Most dismissed him until the 5th letter was found, not in the archives, but growing from the roots of a yew tree behind the palace. It was stitched into a ribbon of bark, the same red ink, the same looping hand. The words were clearer than ever. I planted truth where no lips could speak it. And then, at the bottom, when 5 are found, the 6th will rise on its own. That night, the 6th letter surfaced. No one discovered it. It revealed itself. The Queen's original mirror, now stored in the archive, bled. A single crimson line down its surface. Curators thought it vandalism. But when they wiped it away, the glass cracked from the inside. And behind the crack, the 6th letter appeared, written not on paper, but on skin, as if someone had pressed their chest against the glass and left the words embedded into flesh. And then came the 7th, unwritten, but spoken, by a voice with no mouth. Alira was in the chapel when it happened, alone. Midnight. She'd come looking for answers, or perhaps just silence, but what she found was neither. The air shifted, heavy, metallic. The torches, once long extinguished, lit on their own, and in the flickering light she heard the Queen speak, not with breath, but with presence. The stones of the chapel echoed her words, "You have seen me, but you have not yet heard me." Alira fell to her knees, because now she understood. The letters weren't Isabeau's last message, they were her body, each one a limb, a memory, a voice, and now that all 7 were gathered, she could reassemble. The ancient rites had called it the binding of the 8th mirror, a mythic ritual where a soul fragmented by trauma could be reformed by a living descendant. But it came at a cost. The vessel, the living host, had to forget themselves completely. Only then could the dead fully return. Alira understood. She was the 8th mirror, and her time was almost up. Desperate, she fled the palace. No guards, no advisors. Just her and the 7th letter, burning against her chest like a brand. She followed the path described in the fifth message, the vein map, to the old aqueduct ruins beneath the city. There, hidden beneath centuries of stone, she found it, a chamber that shouldn't exist, circular, silent, smooth as bone. In the center, a stone altar carved with 7 concentric rings, each ring marked with a single word: breath, flesh, name, memory, silence, sight, return. And in the center, her own face, carved in black obsidian. Elira felt a pull, a whisper, not external, but from within. Her voice, but older, deeper. Place the letters, rejoin me. She resisted, but her hands moved anyway. One by one, she placed the 7 letters onto the rings. The stone absorbed them. The chamber trembled. The obsidian face opened its eyes, and Elira collapsed. What happened next would never be fully explained. For 3 full days she was gone. No sign, no trace. Security footage corrupted. Electronic trackers failed. And then, on the 4th morning, she emerged, barefoot, dressed in tattered robes, eyes glowing faintly with silver. She said only one sentence: "She is awake." From that day on, things began to change in Averna. The bells tolled without sound. The mirrors no longer reflected true images. Children began dreaming in languages long dead. And in the palace, Elira took the throne. Not officially. The monarchy still functioned. But everyone knew Elira was no longer merely a princess. She was something else. An echo, a vessel, a living archive of all queens who came before. And in her presence, no one could lie. Not even themselves. The press called it the Age of Transparency. But those who knew the old text had another name, the 8th Mirror Reign. Under her rule, secrets dissolved. Laws were rewritten overnight, hidden crimes exposed. Corruption melted like wax under flame. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the air trembled, and she never blinked. Some said the queen was watching through her. Others said she was the queen, reborn, not just in flesh, but in purpose, because one final truth remained. A truth no one was ready to face. Isabeau's letters were not warnings, they were invitations to see the world not as it is, but as it was before memory was broken. And in that world, thrones were not made of gold, they were made of flesh. And now the throne wanted its queen back. The queen's return was not like lightning. It was not loud, nor sudden, nor violent. It was inevitable, like dawn bleeding slowly over a black sea. Elira no longer walked. She glided as if the air bent for her. She no longer looked at people. She saw through them. And when she smiled, it was with centuries behind her lips. Those closest to her began to vanish. First, the court historian, found drowned in a sealed room. Then, her former tutor, who woke up one morning without a tongue. Still alive, still breathing. The official narrative was silence. But the palace staff had another theory. These were the people who had once mocked Queen Isabeau, who'd twisted her legacy, burned her letters, hidden the truth. Now, they were being rewritten, because what no one had fully grasped yet was this. Isabeau's return wasn't spiritual, it was editorial. History was being revised from the inside out, not by books, not by decree, but by memory itself. The first major rupture came during the coronation rites. It wasn't even supposed to be a coronation, just a ceremonial affirmation of Elira's regency. But when she stepped into the chamber, every torch lit without touch. The choir, instructed to sing Sanctus Averna, fell into silence, and then one by one began to hum a melody that had not been heard in 500 years, Isabeau's lullaby, the one she'd composed during her captivity, the one they claimed had been lost to time. But the worst part? They sang it in her voice, not Elira's, Heron. Some wept, others fled. One elderly advisor collapsed on the marble and whispered, "She's writing us now." After that day, time began to warp. Journals rewritten overnight, statues blinked, letters appeared in people's drawers, letters they had never received, written in their own hand, confessing to things they swore they never did. It was as if history itself had been cracked open, and everything that was buried inside was now spilling out. And still, the queen said nothing, until one night she summoned the council. All 12 members entered the chamber. only 11 left. The 12th, Minister Ardain, was found suspended above the throne in a web of thread, sewn shut, eyes open, heart still beating, embedded into his chest. The 8th letter, the final one, written in blood, sealed in wax that shimmered like a raven's wing. And unlike the others, this letter had no opening line, no salutation, just a single sentence: "What you bury in silence, I shall speak in flesh." By now, the whispers in the capital had grown into a roar. Paranoia turned neighbor against neighbor. People burned their own letters, smashed mirrors, emptied libraries, as if knowledge itself had become poison. They weren't wrong, because in the Queen's presence, truth manifested physically. Secrets clung to people like smoke. Those who lied began to rot, skin first, then teeth, then thought. They called it the withering, but the scholars had a truer name: reversal. You could not suppress truth anymore. The more you hid it, the more it devoured you. It was Isabeau's final gift, and her final curse, because Elira was no longer entirely herself. She still looked like the girl who had once played the lute in palace gardens, who'd laughed under cypress trees and wept at her sister's funeral. But her gaze now held several lifetimes. One day, her childhood nursemaid approached her trembling and asked, "Do you remember me?" Elira turned to her, smiled, and said, "Yes. You hid the second letter inside your pillow. You feared they would kill you if they found it." The nurse collapsed, weeping, because it was true. No one had ever known, not even Elira, until now. The Queen didn't just remember her own life. She remembered everyone's, every betrayal, every truth buried in footnotes and ashes, every whisper turned to silence, and she was ready to unmake it all. But not through fire, not through violence, through reclamation. She called it the mirror reckoning, a simple rite, 7 names spoken, 7 truths revealed, 7 people reborn. At first it seemed merciful, old prisoners released, victims vindicated, but then she chose a name the world feared: Alric Vane, the prince who had once tried to erase her great-grandmother's bloodline. A war criminal, a monster, a man erased from history after the fall. The world had wanted him forgotten. The Queen remembered him anyway, and in a single night he returned, not alive, not whole, but present. His form, not flesh, not shadow, but something between, a historical echo. He sat at the palace gate for 3 days and wept, not out of regret, but because he knew what came next. To remember, the Queen finally spoke, is to resurrect, but some things must remain buried. And she pressed her palm to his chest. He dissolved into dust. The wind did not carry it. It fell inward, into the stones, into the soil, as if the earth itself was swallowing the past. This was the turning point. The Queen was not here to rule. She was here to release, to lift the veil, to make memory physical, and in doing so, she became less human each day. The people began to avoid her gaze, not out of disrespect, but survival. To be seen by her was to be understood completely. No lies, no masks, only raw, bare truth. The scribes noted one final change. At midnight, she no longer slept. She stood in front of Isabeau's cracked mirror and whispered to it, not in Averno, not in Latin, but in a language older than kingdoms, quick, older than time. And every night, the cracks in the mirror healed, just a little, until, on the final night, the mirror reflected nothing, just darkness and her smile. She turned to her guards and said, "There is nothing left to return. I am whole." The next morning she vanished, no trace. Only her dress remained, the same ceremonial gown she'd worn for the ritual. But now, sewn into the hemline, they found one last message. This time, not a letter, not a command, but a question. If memory could speak, would you still silence it? The world changed after that. Historians abandoned the notion of objectivity. Truth became sacred, dangerous, alive. Libraries became temples, mirrors were banned from homes. Children were taught to speak their memories aloud every morning, to prevent the formation of ghosts. And on the highest tower of the palace, where the Queen once stood, a new monument was built, a mirror, not for vanity, but for remembrance. And carved beneath it, For every woman buried in silence, let truth be her resurrection. Thus ended the reign of the queen with the letters sewn into her dress, a queen who would not be forgotten, because she had stitched herself into history, not through power, not through war, but through the one thing no grave can hold. It began with a clumsy monk, a cracked floor tile, and a royal tomb that was never supposed to open. What he found wasn't treasure, it wasn't bones, it was a passage, a secret one, and it led somewhere no one, absolutely no one, was ready for, especially not the royals. If you've ever fantasized about the glory of being royal in the 14th century, allow us to adjust your crown. Being royal wasn't just about velvet robes and goblets of wine. It was sweating through 40 pounds of brocade, surviving a court that operated on gossip and leeches, and, if you were particularly lucky, being entombed alive. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to 1347 in the kingdom of Morenthia. Not a real kingdom anymore, mostly because of what you're about to hear. Our story begins in the Cathedral of Saint Benevolence, which, despite its saintly name, was anything but benevolent. A towering mass of limestone and regret, it loomed over the capital city like a judgmental grandmother, and in its heart lay the tomb of King Alaric II, beloved ruler, feared tyrant, and possible cannibal, depending on which monk you asked. Now, King Alaric had been dead for exactly 112 years, and, like any self-respecting medieval monarch, he had been buried in style. Solid gold crown, 12 rings, a scepter that doubled as a wine flask, and, most importantly, entombed in a sealed chamber with no earthly exit, which is funny because, as fate would have it, the tomb did have an exit. It was just behind a wall, under a tile, beneath a statue of Saint Rumwald, who, suspiciously, had never actually been canonized. They made him up, probably to fill space. Enter Brother Theophilus, short, round, mostly blind, and deeply underqualified for masonry repair. He had been tasked with replacing a cracked tile beside the tomb. Easy work, theoretically, but the floor gave way, and poor Theo didn't so much fall through as vanish with a squeak and a puff of limestone dust. The monks thought he'd been taken by demons, which, in medieval terms, was the second most likely explanation, just behind divine punishment and slightly ahead of too much cheese before bed. What they found, when they looked into the hole, was not Theophilus, at least not right away. It was a staircase, winding, ancient, and most unnervingly not on any architectural records. Naturally, the abbot ordered it sealed immediately, and naturally it was not. Because secrets are like wine. The more you try to cork them, the more they ferment, and eventually someone always drinks. That someone was Lady Isolde de Turn, widow, scholar, and full-time thorn in the side of anyone trying to preserve the sanctity of royal legacy. She believed the tomb hid more than bones, and with a small fortune, 2 mercenaries, and a donkey named Periwinkle, she descended into the staircase one fog-drenched morning. What she found beneath King Alaric's tomb was a lie so massive, so utterly ridiculous, it would take 12 dead scribes, 3 poisoned noblemen, and a cursed violin to unravel. But we'll get to those. The passage led down for 43 steps, then turned sharply west, into what appeared to be a second chamber. But this wasn't a burial room. This was a hallway, lined with portraits, not of saints, not of kings, of servants, each painted in lifelike detail, each with their mouths sewn shut, no plaques, no inscriptions, just eyes, hundreds of eyes staring at Isolde and her donkey like they'd been waiting. At this point, one of the mercenaries, a man known only as Gaspard the Somewhat Tall, suggested they go back. Isolde did not, because tucked behind the last portrait, beneath a tapestry of a stag being disemboweled by angels, was another door, wooden, barred from the outside, and behind it, not treasure, not relics, a fully furnished room, complete with a dining table, a fireplace, a cot, and, this is key, a wineglass still half full. It was as if someone had just stepped out. There were no dust, no cobwebs, no signs of rot. On the table, a letter, written in ink that had not yet dried. It read, "If you have come seeking truth, leave your name behind. You will not need it where you are going." At which point, Periwinkle, the donkey, began to bray uncontrollably. Now, animals in history are often dismissed as minor characters, but donkeys, they know things. Periwinkle, as the records later confirm, had brayed in the exact rhythm of the funeral march of King Alaric II. Coincidence? Sure, but also absolutely not. They proceeded, and what they found next made the stitched mouth portraits look like watercolor daisies. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber, floor to ceiling, every inch covered in carved script. Not Latin, not Avernan, not even a known dialect. It was the royal cipher, a forbidden language created by King Alaric himself, a language only he could speak fluently, a language allegedly designed not to communicate, but to conceal. The walls told a story, but one hidden behind symbols upon symbols, and in the center of the room, a throne, not a grand one, a tiny crude wooden chair, too small for an adult, upon which sat a skeleton, not of a child, not of a man, but of something in between, with elongated fingers, and a crown carved from bone, no jaw. It had been removed. Next to it, an inscription burned into the stone. This is the true heir. It was then that the second mercenary, a woman named Katrina the Knife, asked what everyone else was thinking. Is this a royal crypt or a cursed theater production? Isolde, for once, didn't answer, because something was changing. The air thickened, the temperature dropped, and slowly, one by one, the portraits they'd passed on the way in began to hum, faintly, just enough to register. A song with no words, just low, vibrating pain. The sewn mouths trembled. Isolde took a step back, and the glass on the table upstairs shattered without touch. The passage they'd entered from was gone. Not blocked. Gone. As if the tunnel had never existed. The donkey collapsed. The torch went out. And in that perfect darkness, the hum turned into whispers. Different voices, but all whispering the same phrase, again and again. He never died. He was hidden. When the monks finally opened the cathedral again, they found no donkey, no Lady Isolde, and no mercenaries, just a cracked wineglass and a scent of burnt rosemary. But deeper beneath, where no light reached, where the tombs ended and madness began, something ancient had stirred, something that remembered being king. The official record says the passage was sealed in 1473 due to instability of the limestone. This is technically true. It's just that the instability was spiritual, psychological, possibly demonic, and certainly political. Because, you see, once word began to spread about what lay beneath King Alaric's tomb, something terrifying happened. People believed it. And when people believe the dead aren't truly dead, especially royal ones, bad things follow. Uprisings, cults, fashion trends. Let's rewind just a bit. 2 days after Isolde disappeared, her donkey Periwinkle was found grazing peacefully in a monastery garden 40 miles away, with what appeared to be a wax seal stuck to its hoof. Not just any seal, King Alaric's personal crest, the one supposedly buried with him. Naturally, this threw the entire royal court into a frenzy. Had someone disturbed the tomb? Was Alaric alive? Was the donkey in on it? The reigning monarch, Queen Elsinore VI, who was both deeply devout and tragically short-sighted, ordered a formal investigation. It was led by Lord Crispin Vell, known for his sharp quills and his even sharper boredom. He didn't believe in ghosts, magic, or donkeys with secret messages. That changed quickly. Upon visiting the tomb, Lord Vell experienced what the official report called a profound sense of being observed by unseen teeth. He also found a scrap of parchment hidden inside the wall, one written in the royal cipher. It translated to, "The king beneath was not the first." This baffled historians, because King Alaric was supposedly the founder of the kingdom. If he was not the first, then who had come before him? And more importantly, where were they now? That's when things started to spiral. Queen Elsinore, increasingly paranoid, ordered the exhumation of several past monarchs to check for inconsistencies. What she found was worse than inconsistency. She found emptiness. Several royal coffins, allegedly sealed for centuries, contained no bones at all. One held a black feather and a child's rattle. Another held a single silver shoe with no foot inside. And one, horrifyingly, contained a stone egg wrapped in velvet, which was warm to the touch and softly ticking. These discoveries did not go public. Elsinore had them buried, along with the unfortunate scribes who witnessed them. But whispers slipped out, as they always do, and soon a fringe movement began to take root in the outer provinces. They called themselves the Throneless. They believed that the royal family had been supplanted long ago, replaced by impostors, while the true line was hidden underground, waiting for the stars to align. They held midnight vigils. They sang in the royal cipher. They left offerings at tombs, teeth, coins, jars of breath. And then, just as the queen considered mass arrests, the tomb gave up another surprise. A new passage, not behind the old one, beneath it, discovered by accident when a group of bored acolytes decided to mop the floor with wine, as a tribute, allegedly, only to see the liquid drain into the stone. They pried it open, and down they went. What they found this time was a garden, an underground pitch-black garden, no sunlight, yet everything grew. Twisted ivy, flowers with mouths, trees that bled amber sap when touched, and in the middle a stone altar, carved not with names or prayers, but with lullabies, songs that no one taught but everyone knew. And resting atop the altar, a mask, porcelain, smiling, cracked. Behind it, a wall etched with dozens of royal crests. Some were familiar, some belonged to kings and queens who never existed. And in the center, a single line scratched in fury. We were never sovereigns. We were sacrifices. When word of this garden reached Elsinore, she collapsed in the throne room. Witnesses said she whispered something before fainting. Then what have I been wearing all this time? The next day, she decreed the closure of every royal crypt in the kingdom, and then she vanished. No note, no body, just her crown, left behind on her breakfast plate, filled with pomegranate seeds and a small clump of earth. Chaos followed. The Throneless claimed it was a sign. The rightful king, Alaric or his heir, was returning. The clergy declared it divine punishment for centuries of vanity, and Lord Vel? He just packed his bags and fled to the coast, muttering about mirrors with eyes and the tunnels that breathe. In the months that followed, the cathedral became a site of feverish pilgrimage. People came from across the realm to kneel before a tomb that no longer held a body, in hopes of seeing a ghost, a miracle, or maybe just a hint of truth. But the most devoted, those who stayed overnight, began to report strange dreams. Dreams of being underground, not buried, not dead, just waiting. And in those dreams, someone always whispered from the dark. The crown was never meant to be worn. It was meant to keep something in. They thought it was a crypt, a place for the dead to rest. But they misunderstood one very important thing. The royal tombs were never designed to keep death out. They were designed to keep something in. And now, it was waking up hungry. What happened next can only be described as a national nervous breakdown. The disappearance of Queen Elsinore, the rise of the Throneless, and the discovery of the underground garden had left the kingdom teetering on the edge of mass hysteria. Ministers resigned, nobles fled. The wine merchants, blessed them, doubled their prices and stayed put. But worst of all, the tomb began to hum. Yes, human, not every night, not at first. But by the end of the season, there were entire evenings when the cathedral walls would vibrate with a low, bone-deep frequency, one that made babies cry, dogs howl, and old men weep without knowing why. The clergy attempted to explain it as a rare acoustical phenomenon caused by subterranean wind, which was convenient except for the part where the cathedral has no vents, or wind, or for that matter, a reason for the statues to start crying oil. And that's exactly what started happening. One by one, the effigies of dead kings and queens began to leak. From the eyes, thick black oil reeking of lavender and ash, anointed, unasked. The Throneless called it prophecy. The clergy called it a test. Lord Vel, watching from exile, simply called it Tuesdays. And still, people kept coming, drawn to the crypt, to the garden, to something deeper still. That's when the dreams began to spread, first among the pilgrims, then the clergy, then the royal guard. Identical dreams, identical words. A man, faceless, whispering, "The throne is a mouth. You've been feeding it." By this point, even the skeptics had started to sweat. The remaining council members finally ordered the tomb sealed again, but the stone refused. Masons returned each day to find their work undone. Mortar crumbled, iron rusted, the entrance would not stay closed, so they tried something else. A child. To be clear, not as a sacrifice. Officially, just a purity witness, they said, an innocent soul, unsullied by politics or fear, to walk into the tomb and return with a sign that the dead were at peace. They chose a girl named Tomlin, daughter of a local bell maker. She was 8, and she never came back. But the next day, the bells rang themselves, not just one, all of them, citywide. No one had touched them, no wind, no quake, just a sound, a single dissonant chord that shook windows and shattered every mirror in the cathedral. The clergy took this as a sign. Of what? They weren't sure. They abandoned the cathedral the next week. The pilgrims didn't care. They moved in. Some camped inside. Others dug makeshift shrines in the courtyard. One man brought a live peacock and claimed it was the reincarnation of Alaric's mother. Another just wept non-stop and fed stones to a stuffed fox. No one stopped them, because, honestly, who wanted to get involved at that point? And still, the humming grew louder. That's when the passage appeared again. A new one, a third. It opened one morning beneath the old choir pit, where the floor had collapsed in on itself. And this time, there was no mistaking it. It had been carved recently, not medieval stonework, not natural erosion. Modern, precise, cold, etched into the wall were 6 names. One was Elsinore, one was Lord Vel, one was yours. Yes, you, the person reading this. Don't worry, you're in good company. So were 1,000 others, every pilgrim who'd slept within the crypt shadow. Etched, not written, carved deep with unnatural accuracy. Someone had been down there, recently. At this point, a group of self-declared rationalists formed a committee. They called themselves the Disbelievers. Their slogan was, "Tombs don't whisper and queens don't vanish." They sent down a team of 5. Only one came back. She didn't speak, but she drew. Dozens of pages, obsessively. Shaky hands, frenzied detail. What she drew was not a crypt. It was a throne room, but upside down, built entirely of bone and hair and crushed crowns, and at its center a mirror, not reflecting what stood before it, but what stood behind you. The kingdom was unraveling, the capital emptied, and those who remained, well, they weren't quite themselves anymore. They sang in the dark, they burned wax effigies, and at night, the tomb doors creaked open just a little wider. The garden was dying now, the plants withering, the altar cracking. Whatever was down there, it was done waiting, because one morning a monk was found wandering the city streets, muttering, eyes blackened with ink, and in his hand a scroll. 6 words, the dead are done being quiet. They told you history is written by the victors, but this part was whispered by the bones. And now, the bones have started shouting. The monk's scroll, 6 words carved with what appeared to be fingernails, was the final omen. The dead are done being quiet. The kingdom ignored it, of course, pretended it hadn't happened, pretended everything was still normal, except nothing was normal anymore. The birds had left the capital, the rivers had started flowing backwards, and the cathedral's shadow, once a steady arc over the courtyard, now moved with the moon, even at noon. People saw it, pretended they hadn't, walked faster, and then the throne cracked, not a metaphor, not a political scandal. The actual royal throne, solid oak, centuries old, split in 2, right down the center. During a sermon, no one had touched it. They said it sounded like a jaw dislocating. After that, the remaining court officials tried to evacuate. Most made it halfway to the ships before their horses turned back on their own. Not spooked, obedient, as if summoned, because something had begun to stir beneath the crypt, and that something had a voice. It began in whispers, barely audible through the stone, then chants, then commands, delivered in a language no living man should understand, and yet they all obeyed. One by one, the pilgrims returned to the passage, not with torches or prayers this time, but with offerings, hair, teeth, coins, names. They wrote their own names on parchment, kissed them, and fed them into the garden soil, and the soil swallowed everyone. This was not religion anymore, it was communion. By this point, even the disbelievers had stopped disbelieving. They turned their attention to the mirror, the one the survivor had drawn from memory. A broken logic began to take hold. If the mirror showed not reflections but replacements, perhaps it could offer redemption or at least reversal. It was an absurd theory, but it was all they had. So they descended again. 13 of them. Only 12 returned. But this time, they didn't come back empty-handed. They brought the mirror, wrapped in silk, sealed in salt, carried with iron gloves and trembling hope. It didn't reflect them. It didn't reflect anything at all. Just darkness. Endless, roiling darkness. But when one of the disbelievers held up a candle, the mirror flickered, and in it, Queen Elsinore, alive, speaking, mouthing something over and over. But no sound came through, just the hum, until the candle blew out. Then the screaming began. No one remembered lighting the cathedral torches, but they all burned at once. The statues bled again, this time gold, not oil, and the dead monarch's effigies began to shift. A finger here, a blink there. The crypt was no longer holding the past. It was replaying it, rewriting it, every lie, every murder, every backroom betrayal, on loop, and in the center of it all, a voice, not shouting, not roaring, just narrating, as if reading from a book no one remembered writing. One man, a former court scribe, collapsed from the weight of memory. He clawed at his chest, shouting, "I never told anyone, I never told anyone, how do they know?" He died sobbing, and the voice simply continued, telling the story, your story, the names on the wall, the garden beneath the tomb, the mirror that reflected hunger, the throne that was never meant to rule, only to feed. The truth was obscene. The royal line had not guarded the crypt, it had been guarded by the crypt, an endless chain of sacrificial distraction. Power as bait, because the true monarch, the real ruler of this land, had always been below. Not a person, not even a spirit, something older, hungrier, a will, a ritual, a hole in the world shaped like a king. And now, the chains were broken. The final ceremony was underway, not with blood, not with war, with memory, recalled, rewritten, replayed, every citizen complicit by remembering it wrong, and by remembering it at all. That's when they realized the passage was gone, not sealed, not hidden, just never there to begin with, as if it had only existed for those who believed in it, who followed it, who descended. The entire city began to dissolve, not collapse, forget. Maps changed, books blanked. The royal bloodline, once the cornerstone of history, now showed up in no ledgers, no portraits, no graves, not even whispers. Only the mirror remained, cracked now, quiet, and inside it, still nothing. Just the faintest shimmer of a throne made of shadows, waiting, watching. And if you listen closely tonight, closer than is wise, you might hear the hum again, not from beneath your feet, but inside your own bones, because the past never dies. It just waits to be retold.